2 years ago, I bought the Rolex Explorer 124270, the newest version of the 36mm Explorer. And for the past 2 years, I've worn this watch, traveled with it, and thought about it more than I probably should have. And boy, do I have some thoughts to share. Here's the honest truth. I've enjoyed this watch, but I also have some major gripes with it, and one major regret. And so in today's video, I want to talk about my experience with the Rolex Explorer, the good and the bad, and really answer the question, would I still recommend this watch? I think the answer to that question is a lot more complicated than I originally thought it would be. Before I share my verdict, I want to share some important thoughts about the Rolex Explorer. The Rolex Explorer has always been Rolex's answer to the field watch, but due to some flashier elements, it's really morphed into one of the best go anywhere, do anything, or GADA watches in the industry. The original story that was marketed to us was that Sir Edmund Hillary, who was the first person to summit Mount Everest along with Tenzing Norgay, was wearing the Rolex Explorer, but that actually isn't true. In reality, Sir Edmund Hillary was wearing a competitor to Rolex, a brand called Smith's, and their A404, which is a watch that is awfully similar looking to the Rolex Explorer that we know today. And Tenzing Norgay, on the other hand, was wearing a Rolex, but it was a Rolex Oyster Perpetual, as the Rolex Explorer did not exist yet. That Oyster Perpetual would eventually inspire the Explorer that we know today in terms of the look and branding. Regardless of the Explorer's checkered past, this watch is supposed to be worn in the toughest of conditions. And although my day-to-day is nothing like summiting the peak of Mount Everest, I have worn this watch for the majority of days over the past 2 years. That original history drew me to the Rolex Explorer, but it wasn't the main reason why this watch very quickly became my grail watch when I got into the hobby of watch collecting. The main reason why I fell in love with it was because, in my mind, it was the ultimate example of a go anywhere, do anything piece. No nonsense, no complications, just pure form and function. The Rolex Explorer always just seemed to be a watch that made sense for me and my lifestyle. I don't dive, I don't race cars, and really I just wanted something I could wear no matter what the occasion and never have to think twice. But this is actually my second go-round of buying and owning a Rolex Explorer. I previously owned the reference 114270, the prior generation to the one that I own today. And I sold that watch thinking that I needed the modern build, the upgraded movement, and the better specifications of this new version of the Explorer. And again, that really brings me to the central goal of this video, to share my thoughts on the newer version of the Explorer after 2 years of ownership, and share the good and the bad, because again, there is some bad and some gripes that I want to share, and then talk about whether I would actually recommend this watch after 2 years. Okay, so I think it's only right that we do a very quick breakdown of the stats and specifications of this newer Rolex reference 124270. Okay, so let's just share the absolutely crucial pieces of information here, starting with the dimensions. This watch, of course, measures in at 36mm in terms of the case diameter. It is 43mm from lug tip to lug tip, 19mm between the lugs, and it is 11.6mm thick. And just branching off of the measurements really quick, there's some important pieces of information you should know. Number one, the 36mm case is what is marketed, but really it's about 35.5mm, so it's definitely going to wear a bit smaller than most people expect. The other thing to know is that not only is the lug width at the case 19mm, which is a pretty odd size, it also tapers down to 14mm at the clasp. So it really has a very strong taper, about 5mm from the top of the bracelet to the clasp, which some people are going to find a little bit too dramatic and not really like the look of. I personally have a 6.5-inch wrist, which is definitely on the smaller side. So for me, these dimensions are just absolutely perfect. I think this is a perfect fitting watch for my wrist. But if you have an average to above average size wrist, I don't know if you're going to love the look of this watch depending on your taste. And again, that bracelet taper is very aggressive, so I recommend trying this watch on in the flesh and really trying to get your eyes on it to see if it's something that you would enjoy. As we've come to expect with the Explorer, this watch has a beautiful black dial. I know over the years, the Explorer has sort of changed the form of their black dial, sometimes having a shinier or more lacquer finish. Sometimes it's more of a flat black, but in this case, it is a bit shinier. It also has those beautiful white gold indices, and at the 6 o'clock, you're going to see that this watch is a superlative chronometer. Just like most Rolex watches, that means it leaves the factory at plus or minus 2 seconds of accuracy for the movement. And the movement's a very important thing to discuss here. This piece has the Rolex in-house caliber 3230, which has 70 hours of power reserve, shock resistance, magnetic resistance, and although it is supposed to be the awesome successor to the very rock solid 3130 movements from Rolex, this piece has had some reported issues with the amplitude, which we'll talk about in a moment. Last but not least, this particular watch has an on-the-fly adjustment system for the bracelet. That's called the Rolex Easy Link system. That's basically a static 5mm of on-the-fly adjustment that you can toggle on and off depending on your wrist needs. It's definitely not as precise as the Rolex Glide Lock or Tudor T-Fit systems, but it is something. So before I get very negative about this 2-year review of the Rolex Explorer, let's start with the good stuff, the stuff that I've really enjoyed over the past 2 years. So the first positive that I have to discuss is without a doubt the bracelet. And in my opinion, the Oyster bracelet from Rolex is probably the best bracelet in the industry today, or at least the best bracelet I've personally ever tried on. I convinced myself that I needed to upgrade from the older version of the Explorer to this newer version almost exclusively because of this amazing bracelet. That older version of the Explorer had that classic jingly jangly style bracelet, that stamped clasp, no on-the-fly adjustment, and just overall it just felt like a way less solid bracelet. And so that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to upgrade, and I'm definitely not disappointed. I mentioned a second ago that the on-the-fly adjustment system isn't perfect, but it is something, and in my opinion it is better than having nothing. The second positive I want to discuss, which really goes for any reference of the Rolex Explorer, is just the sheer versatility that this watch has. There's a reason why when you talk about the best go anywhere, do anything watches, the most versatile watches in the world, the Rolex Explorer's name always seems to come up. I have worn this watch with more formal attire, with shorts and a t-shirt, with my business casual workwear, and really just everything in between. It's just such a perfect watch to just throw on and not have to think about anything else. I love my dress watches and my dive watches and all the different watches that I have, but in my opinion, if I had to just pick one, it would definitely be the Explorer because I know it could handle any situation. I am personally not a big fan of wearing more sport-focused or dive watches with formal wear, but for some reason the Rolex Explorer, despite leaning more sporty, just really works well in that environment. In the watch community, we always talk about a one watch collection, which for many of us is super unrealistic, including myself, but if I had to sell everything else and wear only one watch, this would certainly be the one. My third positive point that I want to mention is just the overall build quality. I'll make this pretty quick because I know this ties into the bracelet and how well built that is as well. But when you pay a lot of money for a watch, you want it to feel nice, you want it to feel hefty on the wrist, at least for me, that's kind of what I want to feel. And I love how this watch carries its weight very well, but it's still extremely comfortable and it just truly feels like a luxury watch. Many times I've purchased quote-unquote luxury watches for them to only feel a little bit disappointing on wrist. And the last positive point I'll mention, which could be a bit silly to say, is just the overall value retention of the Explorer and really most Rolex watches. Again, it's a bit obvious, but it is something that truly needs to be factored into the decision-making of buying a Rolex watch and buying the Explorer. If you buy it for a pretty decent price, you should be able to get what you paid for it out of it in a couple years' time if you need to sell it. I shared some good things about this watch, but this piece is not perfect, so I want to take a moment to talk about the bad things or the gripes that I had with this piece. The first negative is the 19mm lug width. I know for the most part you're probably not going to take this piece off of the stock bracelet, but to be honest with you, I've owned this piece for 2 years, of course, and I'm getting a little bored of the bracelet. I kind of want to change it up a bit, and it's extremely inconvenient that it has a 19mm lug width because that is a pretty rare size. I feel like most collectors have a stockpile of straps in very common sizes like 18, 20, and 22mm. So again, 19mm is just a bit random, and I just wish it had 20mm between the lugs. That's what the previous generation Explorer had. I think the proportions were really good, and so 19mm, again, a bit annoying. And on that note, I just generally prefer the proportions of the previous generation Explorer more than the current one. I'm not sure if it was the 20mm lug width like I mentioned or what exactly the main factor was, but I just like the other generation, the older one, a bit better than the current one. I know to the naked eye, to a non-watch enthusiast, these watches are identical, but again, I personally prefer the older one. And here comes the biggest problem with this new Rolex Explorer. It's the movement. The 3230 movement from Rolex, which at the time was a brand new movement, which has now been in Rolex models for a number of years, just has some reported issues that get me very worried. For those who are unaware, the 32 series of movements from Rolex were supposed to be the amazing successors to the 31 series of movements that were just known to be extremely rock solid. The problem is there's been a lot of anecdotal pieces of evidence going around online over the past number of years that the 32 series of movements have had a serious problem with their amplitude going out of whack. This will eventually lead to the watch not keeping time within those superlative chronometer standards. And here's the thing, I have this watch under Rolex's factory warranty for a couple more years, so for the time being, I'm not very worried about this particular movement issue. But if we get to 3+ years from now and I start having this amplitude problem, I'm gonna be pretty upset. I mean, I personally don't expect perfect movements out of the factory from brands like Seiko on their lower end models, but not a very high-end watch like a Rolex. The other issue is that I've seen some very mixed reporting that they've actually solved this problem. Some people online say they have, some people say they haven't, so I'm not really sure what's going on, and Rolex has of course not made an official statement about it. So you could honestly throw away all of the positives and all the negatives about this watch, and if you just focused on this issue with the movement, it probably would be a good enough reason for you to not buy this watch, if I'm being quite honest. Like I said, for the time being, I'm under warranty, so fingers crossed there's no issues after that period, but yeah, something I'm certainly thinking about and a huge issue I have with this watch for the foreseeable future. So if I could just be really honest with you all for a second, as I mentioned, I sold my 114270 Explorer for this newer Explorer, and I'm not really sure if it was the right decision. I had owned that watch for 2 years before I sold it, and I built up a lot of great memories with it. But beyond the sentimental piece, that watch really just has that old school Rolex mentality. It really just seemed way more rock solid than this newer version, despite the newer build and newer features probably being more advantageous on this newer model. But what I can honestly tell you after wearing the new version of the Rolex Explorer for the past couple of years is that you don't really notice the small details on a day-to-day basis. The reasons why you like the older watch better, or the reasons you're nervous about the new movement, or all these different little gripes or things that you like about it, they don't really come up. If you have a great daily piece, whether it's a Rolex Explorer or something else, the goal is really to just appreciate the versatility and flexibility that this watch offers, and in my mind, that's what the Rolex Explorer does so well. So yes, I could sit here and really debate all the different features that this watch has versus the older Explorer versus another everyday watch like the Omega Seamaster or IWC Mark 20 or whatever you want to talk about. But in my opinion, it really just comes down to, do you like the watch on your wrist, and does it serve the purpose that you want it to serve? But that being said, that rational or logical argument you make in your head gets thrown aside when you actually have that watch on your wrist and in your hands. Suddenly, instead of specifications, the number one priority is your experience. But if I could talk to my past self, I would tell myself not to worry about the specifications so much. Yes, in the world of watches today, the main thing we talk about are the specifications and the features that each watch has, but that really isn't the main story of any watch. I would have tried to remind myself that the watch I already had was a great piece and already served the function that I wanted to serve. So with all that being said, would I actually recommend this newer version of the Rolex Explorer? Well, you may be surprised to hear my answer, because despite saying I kind of regret upgrading to this newer version, I would certainly recommend this piece. If you are a specification-focused buyer who wants the best version of the Rolex Explorer that you can buy today, and one of the best go-anywhere, do-anything watches, the best field watch that you can buy today, then I would highly recommend this new version of the Rolex Explorer. This watch will certainly serve you well. It'll have the newest movement from Rolex, the newest bracelet quality, and everything that you want in a modern luxury watch. It'll truly feel and act the part as a high-quality luxury go-anywhere, do-anything piece. But if you're not someone who's a specification-focused buyer, I would probably not recommend this piece to you. You're probably better off getting something like the older version of the Rolex Explorer as your daily watch. Or if you're not so concerned about having Rolex on the dial, something like the Omega Aquaterra or so many other watches in this GADA space. I fell in love with the Rolex Explorer because I thought it was the epitome of an everyday watch, but there's so many amazing options out there in that everyday space. For whatever reason, I very quickly identified the Rolex Explorer as a perfect watch for me, but it's not the perfect watch for everybody. I have learned a ton about watch collecting over these past 2 years wearing this Rolex Explorer. I've learned a lot about regret and specifications and trying not to worry about specifications. And at the end of the day, this is a great watch, and I think if you bought it, you would not be disappointed. If you're someone out there right now watching this video because you're debating buying this exact reference of Rolex Explorer, like I said, you're probably not going to be disappointed, but I would highly recommend you take into account the pitfalls that I've seen while wearing this watch over the past 2 years. And I'm curious what you guys have to say in the comment section down below. What do you think about the Rolex Explorer? And more importantly, what are your favorite everyday watches to wear? But yeah, let me know all your thoughts down below. I love interacting with all of you. And if you enjoyed this video, I would greatly appreciate it if you can give this video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.